Keep watching and you'll see what can happen when one side fails to fight against their opponent's space advantage in the centre. This is game 10 of Logical Chess Move by Move, and today we've got Tarrasch with the white pieces up against Eckart with black. Now this game was played all the way back in 1889, so a very old game, but still a very instructive one. So let's jump right in. We get e4 and e6. So for the first time in the book, we see the French defence. Now one advantage of the French from black's point of view is that it cuts down the amount of opening theory that black needs to know. If you play the symmetrical king's pawn opening instead, well then black needs to be prepared for f4, the king's gambit, or the Vienna game, or after knight f3, knight c6, then there's d4, the Scotch, there's bishop to c4, the Italian, or there's bishop to b5, the Roy Lopez. And each one of these are deep and complex opening systems which black needs to be prepared for if they're going to play at a high level. So by playing the French instead, there's a much more typical pawn structure that black can achieve. Essentially, the game gets played more on black's terms. Now, white plays d4 and then d5. The pawn on e6 supports the d5 advance. Now, one way to annoy French defense players is by capturing on d5 here. After black captures back, both of the e-pawns have been traded, and you've got this very symmetrical pawn structure known as the exchange French. Now, the reason that it annoys French defense players is that it doesn't allow them to play with their usual French defense pawn structure, with their usual plans. It's quite drawish, and it does equalize quite quickly for black. So black shouldn't be worried about this, but as I said, many players who play the French don't enjoy the exchange variation. But that's not what we got in this game. Instead, we got knight to d2. Now, this knight might look a bit funny on the d2 square. You might be wondering, why doesn't it go to c3 instead? Looks much more natural. Well, we're going to see why. It'll become clear in a minute. So black plays knight to f6 and white advanced with e5. Now black should not advance the knight forward here because after this capture, the black pawn on e4 is very weak and can probably be collected quite soon. It's just overextended. White can eventually play knight to e2 and knight to c3, and this pawn will be a goner. So instead, after e5, black played the main move, which is bringing it back to d7. Again, it might look awkward on d7, but it can get back into the game later. This is part of the theory. White plays bishop to d3, developing the light-squared bishop to the most active diagonal, anticipating that black's going to castle kingside, after which this bishop will be a good attacking piece. And now black strikes at the base of white's pawn chain with c5. Now, what white is able to do here is play c3. That is a move that wouldn't have been possible if white had played knight to c3 earlier, like if we just see the same kinds of moves. After c5 comes, white can't bring the pawn to c3 because the knight's in the way. So that's the advantage of the Tarrasch variation. So back to the game, after c5 we do get c3 and then knight to c6. So one of black's main ideas is to put pressure on the d4 pawn. We're seeing this already with c5 and the knight on c6 attacking that pawn. Now white brings their kingside knight out to e2. Again, looks a bit awkward if you don't understand the theory behind the French defense. So the idea of bringing this knight out here instead of the more natural f3 square is that if you put this knight on f3, then this knight on d2 can't get there. So this knight needs a square to get out of the way of the dark squared bishop. And if this knight ends up on f3, then it can't go there. So we're going to see this. Going back now to the game. Knight to e2. Queen to b6 with more pressure against d4. And knight to f3 is played. So now white is prepared to castle kingside. Now if you're enjoying this video so far, go ahead and click the subscribe button I'll be continuing this series on Chernev's classic book, Logical Chess Move by Move, so by subscribing you won't miss out on any of the future videos. Now so far the game has adhered very closely to modern opening theory, and in fact I've had this exact position many times with both white and with black over 100 years later. But now we're going to see the first inaccuracy from black here. Now this is a very normal move, a very natural move, and I want you to pay attention to the evaluation bar on the left as I play this move. Bishop to e7, very natural. Preparing to castle and getting the bishop off its starting square. But the thing is, in this position, white has a big space advantage in the center thanks to this pawn chain. And black needs to start breaking it down, even in priority to finishing his own development. So according to modern opening theory, what black should do here instead is to capture on d4 and then play f6. Now white will capture here, and you can see how white's formerly impressive center has been chipped away at. Just to play a couple more moves, we might see castles from white, we might see bishop to d6 from black, and black will look to castle pretty soon with a semi-open f-file. That is what players do in modern chess. But of course, back then, I guess Eckart didn't know all of this, and it was games like this that helped us build our understanding of modern opening theory in the first place, because we're going to see what happens to black here, and it isn't pretty. So bishop to e7, both sides castled, and now white is able to play knight to f4, starting to bring the pieces towards the enemy king. Now one effect of this move, knight to f4, is that black cannot play f6 anymore. If he played f6, then he'd simply lose the pawn on e6. So realizing this and understanding that he wanted to play f6, eventually black played a pretty desperate move, a backwards move, knight to d8. Now what this does is it defends the pawn on e6 so that f6 can be played later. But this move comes with some drawbacks. Black is going backwards, and if we compare the activity of black's minor pieces with the activity of white's minor pieces, well, I think it's clear to see that white is doing much better here in terms of activity. Now, when you gain an advantage, the thing to do is to keep building the pressure. And white was able to do that with queen to c2. Now this attacks the pawn on h7. Looks like quite a transparent threat, but what it does is it forces one of the pawns in front of the black king to move forward, thus creating weaknesses. And it's a tough decision which pawn to move forward. If you move the h-pawn forward, then maybe white could look to reorganize the order of the queen and the bishop, maybe bishop to c2, queen to d3, and attack h7 this way. Or if instead black had gone for g6, well, white could keep softening up the structure around the black king with h4, h5. Or black could play the move played in the game, which was f5. Now, white can't allow this line to stay closed. If that pawn is allowed to stay where it is, then this diagonal will be blocked. So capturing en passant is what white did, and black took back. So now this knight at least has gotten back towards a good defensive post, defending the pawn on h7. But white looked to continue building threats, and was able to do that with knight to g5. Now, if you enjoy playing attacking dynamic chess, then I help ambitious adults at the below 2000 ELO level do just that. If you want to improve your middle game and understand how that you can launch attacks with a greater chance of success, click the link in the description below and we can see if working together will be a good fit. But knight to g5 is a great move because now the pawn on h7 is attacked 3 times by the queen, the bishop and the knight, and defended now just twice by the knight and the king. And how can black add an extra defender to that pawn? Well, he can't actually. He can't add an extra defender to the pawn. There's a choice here for black. If black tries to move the pawn out of the way in order to save it, so at least it can't be captured, well then white can play bishop to h7 check anyway, so that doesn't win a pawn, but it does win the game, because if black takes with the knight, then that's checkmate. The knight on g5 covers the f7 escape square as well. And if instead black moves the king out of the way, then the other knight hops into g6, and that's checkmate as well. So the only real try here, after knight to g5, was g6. Now, if you know anything about sacrificing and when the right moment to sacrifice could be, then this should be like a red rag to a bull. There definitely must be a winning sacrifice here. Just look at all of the pieces around the black king. But still, it's important to know which piece to sacrifice with. I think it's clear that there needs to be a sacrifice on g6, but do you do it with the bishop or with the knight? One of them is correct and one of them is wrong. I'd invite you to pause the video actually if you'd like to have a go at solving this, or if the answer is not immediately obvious to you. But taking with the knight would actually not be correct, because after black takes back, this bishop isn't actually that scary. I mean, it's a bit scary. There's still a wide open black king, but black has chances to defend here. Look at the evaluation bar, it says slightly better for white. I think practically this could be a two-result game. One side could make a mistake, like if white is not fast enough, then white could end up losing due to the lost piece, or if black doesn't defend accurately, then white could break through. But anyway, this is not the right way to go forward. This is not forcing enough. Instead, the correct way to do this is by sacrificing the bishop, because now after black takes back, then you come in with the queen, and it's much scarier having a queen on g6 giving a check to the black king than it is having a bishop on g6 with this queen all the way back on c2 still. So bishop takes g6 was played, and black had to really take that one, otherwise he's just a pawn down. And then queen takes g6 check, and now king to h8 is forced. And now quite a good finish here. Queen to h6 check, forcing the king back to g8. And now there's a saying in chess that you should look at the checks, the captures, and the threats. Sometimes we forget about the threats. Sometimes we look at only checks and captures. But in this case, it's actually the strongest way to continue to play a threat, an unstoppable threat. It's not a check, it's not a capture, but the move knight to g6 ended the game with resignation, because there's no way now to stop the dual threats of queen to h8 checkmate or knight takes e7 checkmate. So really a model game there on how to play against the French defence if your opponent is slow in breaking down the centre. If you enjoyed this video, click here to check out the next one in the series. Every game in logical chess move by move will help improve your middle game understanding and help improve your results.